नमस्ते सभी स्वागत है आपका इस प्रोग्राम में वेलकम एवरीवन प्लीज वेलकम टू दिस इंडिक स्टडीज टोरंटो वेबिनार द टॉपिक टुडे इज माय हिंदू वेडिंग डिस्कवरिंग धर्मा so our speaker today is Shri Dr. Melissa Kapoor. She has a DPhil from University of Oxford in Statistics, which is applied to medical imaging. She now has an award-winning medical technologies company. So today she is going to talk to us about her journey into Hinduism and all her experiences and what the Sanatan Dharma or Hinduism holds for her and for her future generation. So Melissa ji, welcome and please continue.
Dhanyavad, Samir ji, and thank you very much to Indic Centre Toronto for inviting me onto this. I feel really, really honoured. You've got a really great following on Facebook, I've noticed, and YouTube. So many congratulations for all the work you're doing. So yes, today I'll be talking about my story, starting particularly with my Vedic Vivah Sanskar. And in fact, I'm going to try and stage my talk focusing on different sanskars in my life. So as you know, there are 16 sort of major sanskars in a person's life. And the purpose of these sanskars is to help you make the best progress towards moksha, which, as we know, is the main purpose in life. So these are events within one's life that helps with that progression towards moksha. And my story really begins here with the 13th sanskar, the Vivah sanskar. But just before that, it might be worth me spending just 2 minutes telling you about who Melissa was before that 13th sanskar, before I even really knew what Hinduism was. So I have a complete European lineage, brought up as a Christian, as a mild Christian, which in fact is, to be true, in truth, is, I guess, how most Christians in the UK are. There are some very strong Christians here as well, but the vast majority are relatively mild. They might go to church just now and then. Really, growing up, our focus within the family was that we, as children, should all be studious and hardworking and achieve things in life. So I used to spend pretty much all my time either doing homework or doing a lot of sport. And I was very accomplished in both spheres, in both academic sphere and the sporting sphere. And I was quite happy, quite fulfilled. I came out of school with top grades, did a physics degree, then went on to do a PhD at Oxford in statistics applied to medical imaging. So life was quite good, actually. But now when I look back, having now become a Hindu and experiencing so much in my visits to India and my learning of the Shastras and India's history, I can look back and see that life back then was actually a little dull, a little grey. In fact, even during my PhD, I remember thinking life has become a bit sort of devoid of senses, because I would go into my office every day and just sit in front of my computer and be typing away, coding. And that was, and you'd go back home and then you'd sleep and then it'd be repeat. You just do the same thing every day. And it felt a bit dull. It was lacking colour. It was lacking diversity. It was lacking just excitement and the celebration of life. Back then, I was also somebody who was very careful not to say anything offensive, to always just take the popular sort of moderate view on any issue. And finally, back then, I would say I was sort of rejecting femininity. And that's because in the West, women have been oppressed for so many centuries that there's been this backswing, the complete opposite direction, where either you become ultra feminine, like to the point where it's so superficial that you are depriving yourself of any substance, it's all about your looks, etc. Or you completely reject your femininity. And I think I kind of fell into that second camp. And in many ways, that's why, in the end, I chose to study the sciences and technology. It was because growing up, we've been led to believe that to be successful and have a fulfilled life, you had to go into what were considered the men's sphere of life. And that was, science and technology, even though actually I was actually very good at, art and dance and the other subjects. It fed into this idea of, to be a successful woman nowadays, you have to almost remove yourself of your femininity and be like the men. So that just paints you a picture of what I was like before then I met my husband. And that was about nearly 6 years ago, 5.5, 6 years ago now. And after meeting him about a year later or so, we got engaged and I visited India for the first time. And so at this point, I didn't really know at all anything about Hinduism, because at school, we didn't learn anything. In the home environment, the topic of Hinduism certainly never came up. So I really didn't know anything about Hinduism, very little about India. So my first visit, I literally came as like a blank sheet, not knowing what to expect. And I absolutely fell in love with it. I fell in love with the color, the food, the music, the dance, and just the attitude everyone had to enjoying life. It was just so vibrant and just such a contrast to that sort of slightly dull life that I just described, of me going into the office and just coding every day and going home and repeat. So when I was on that first visit to India and the topic of conversation of obviously where should we get married cropped up, I knew straight away I wanted to get married in India. When you compare that to some of my friends' weddings, obviously Christian weddings in the UK, in cold, dark churches or in completely characterless registry offices, for me, there was just no question. I wanted the color, I wanted the vibrancy of a wedding in India. So my in-laws arranged a beautiful traditional Vedic vivah sanskar for my husband and I. And it was about 90 minutes long, the actual ceremony. And there were only about 30 people in attendance, just really neighbors, a few friends, family, some neighbors. When you compare that to the big weddings that are associated with Hinduism and with Bollywood, we didn't want any of that. We wanted it to be quality over quantity, essentially. And we wanted, it to be traditional and simple and beautiful and special. And it really was. And so the Panditji was conducting the ceremony in Sanskrit, but my in-laws had also arranged for a person to be translating into English the meaning of every ritual, every stage of our Vedic vivah sanskar. So after the wedding, so many people came up to us who'd been attending and said, gosh, I didn't know any of this. You see, they knew that these different sort of activities or rituals happened in the vivah sanskar, but they didn't know why. So I thought it'd be interesting for me to spend the next sort of 5-10 minutes talking you through these different rituals and what their meaning is. So it started with Parikrama, and that's where the groom arrives to the bride's house. Now, and in my case, because the whole wedding was taking place at my in-laws' house, we had to sort of pretend that their house was my family's house. So what was ultimately happening is that people were being welcomed by my mum as sort of guests to their own house. And then they were, after the wedding, imagining that they were leaving there to then go to the groom's house, even though actually we were just circling around within the same house. And it actually all was taking place in the sort of veranda area just outside the house. So once the groom's side arrived, my husband's side arrived, then I arrived, escorted by family. And we did Jaimala, which is the exchange of garlands, where the bride chooses or she confirms her choice in who she wishes to marry. A very affirming event for a woman, which is ultimately it's her choice who she marries in a wedding. Then I offered water and the best seat in the house and a mixture of ghee and honey to my husband to be. And he sprinkled the water around him, which signifies, cleansing, because obviously he's just journeyed here, apparently. And then he also sprinkled the ghee and honey. And what that represents is that it's the end of his student life and the beginning of his life as a householder or grihast in the Gurukul system. And what I mean by he's now had that transition to then take on the responsibility to be responsible for all the house members and to always make sure they are happy and they are fed, and particularly that all the householders are fed before he is, including me. And again, I think that goes against what many people think about Hinduism, outside of Hinduism, or even maybe within Hinduism, where it is incorrectly perceived as misogynistic. Here we have the bride choosing the husband in a very definite action with the Jaimala, and then the husband taking on the responsibility to make sure that everyone is happy and everyone is well fed before he is. Then around the oven, Agni Dev arose to purify the area, because what Agni Dev is, it's the most pure element there is. And in front of such a pure element, any vow, any pratigya that is taken is unbreakable. And it's important to note that in Hindu weddings, it's important that the bride's face is always uncovered so that you can see exactly who is getting married to who. So that in addition to Agni Dev being the witness, so too are the friends and family in attendance. They can see exactly who is getting married. Next, my mum did Godan, which again is misunderstood. It's not donation of a cow, mata or cow. It's donation for the cow, and it symbolizes that I will be sort of like an asset to the groom's family, that I won't just be a burden on them. Then there was Kanyadan, where my in-laws and my parents, they welcomed the other child into the marriage, and to say that they are now an indivisible part of their family. And I just love that, how in Hindu weddings it's such a sort of family event, in terms of the whole family is taking part and making pratigyas. It's not just the man and the woman making a promise to each other. It's two families literally coming in, uniting and promising to stay united. Then both my husband and I made a pratigya to always be indivisible, like two containers of water. When you mix them together, you then can't divide them up again. They are indivisible. Then it was pranigraha, where my husband took my hand and accepted me as his wife and promised to always keep me happy right into my old age. And then in response to that, I then made a similar sort of pratigya, where I replied that I would also always share his happiness as well as the difficult times in our life together. Then there was Lajaron, which is the puffed rice, where my brother, although actually my brother wasn't actually attending the wedding, someone else stood in for him, hands me the puffed rice. And what that symbolizes is prosperity for the married couple. And rice is particularly important or symbolic in a Hindu wedding, because it's the only plant that flowers and produces fruit once it is replanted. And obviously that's what happens with a bride, right? She comes from one family, but she actually blossoms once she gets married and she enters her husband's family. So it's really beautiful. Then Shilaroha, where I put my foot on a stone and my husband was chanting mantras at that time. And what that signifies is that I have a permanent position in the groom's family, as strong as a rock, as a stone. Then it was the Parikrama, which I guess is what many people know best about a Hindu wedding. So my sari's palu was tied to my husband's angravastra, and we conducted 4 parikramas around Agni, and it is 4, not 7, we were explained. And with each ambulation, the bond between the husband and the wife gets stronger. In the first 3, I was leading as the Lakshmi, and then for the 4th, my husband led, because at that point we were the Adhangani, we were the half parts to each other. Then there were the Saptapadi, the 7 steps. And what these 7 steps signify are the important aspects of a marriage. And it's important to note that the left foot always has to follow after the right foot. So it's always right foot first and then left foot, because the right foot signifies dharma and logic, and the left foot signifies emotions and sentiments. So nothing should ever come above dharma. So right foot first, then left foot. And so what these 7 steps signify are: the first is material wealth, the second, energy and health, the third, other forms of wealth, such as your passions and your hobbies. The 4th step signifies your happiness together, your 5th, children and family, 6th, a promise to always contribute to society, and 7th, an eternal love for your husband, wife. After the Saptapadi, we did 1 more Parikrama where neither of us was leading. We were both going around together as equals. Finally, my husband put the Mangal Sutra on me and the Sindoor. We did a prayer to Surya Dev as the source of energy for everything on earth. And we did Ashirvad to our parents. And at the end of the ceremony, my mum, it was her first visit in India and obviously her first experience of the Hindu wedding. She said it was the most beautiful ceremony she'd ever been to, that how could anything other than good things happen in our lives now, because it has set us up in such a beautiful way. And I totally agreed with her. Now, when you hear that description of our wedding, I know it makes me feel so happy, so blessed. It's such a sensitive set of rituals with such meaning, such wisdom. And when I reflect on, then afterwards, I attended one of my school friends' Hindu weddings in the UK. The contrast was so stark, because they had chosen to do it in quite a gimmicky way. There was a big audience, yes, and that's not a bad thing at all. But the Panditji they chosen, I don't actually think it really was a genuine Panditji. But what she was doing gimmicky things like getting her mobile phone out and pretending to call Ganeshji to ask for blessings for the couple and things like that. And it just was so devoid of that beauty, of that sensitivity. It was just really sad. And to be honest, I felt a little embarrassed, because many of my other friends in attendance, obviously that's the impression they then get of a Hindu wedding. And it's just not correct at all, unfortunately. So after my Vedic Vivaha Sanskar, obviously my story continues, and it continues into Hinduism with arms wide open. Because after that beautiful Vedic Vivaha Sanskar, I just wanted to know more and to experience more of Hinduism. So it started off obviously just being part of different festivals, of Rakhi Bandhan, of Holi, of Diwali. It was listening to lectures, particularly on Vedanta in the early days, and just finding so much wisdom and truth in the knowledge there. It was reading the Amma Chitrakatha comics to learn about India's history and some of the Shastras at a very basic level, because obviously they're meant for children, but it was a good introduction for me. Then progressing on to watching the Ramayana and the Mahabharata TV series. And finally, now I'm at the stage where I'm actually reading the Shastras for myself. It's taken you a little time to get to that point, to have the basic understanding, to be able to read the Shastras. And through that, over the years, as I've been, taking part and learning, I've been seeing such benefits for myself. So the first benefit of now having become a Hindu is that I feel so mentally strong. And that's not to say I wasn't mentally strong before, but I feel I have a whole new level of mental strength now. And I credit that partly to the fact that Hinduism just helps you put things into perspective. In fact, I think that's the core point here. It puts things into perspective, because in Hinduism, you're very aware that there are massive time scales in operation here. When you compare this to the Abrahamic faiths, my Christian past faith, where everything seemed to have taken place in the last 2,000 years, it gives you a very sort of narrow-minded view of history and the world. Whereas when, as a Hindu, when you're reading the Shastras, when they're talking about time, quite often you'll see these massive, massive numbers with 0,0,0,0,0 billions and billions of years. And it's no wonder that in Hinduism, they've known always that the universe is billions of years old. And actually, because the universe is, and existence is cyclical, that's just of one cycle. And scientifically, with modern day telescopes and simulations, we have validated this, modern day scientists. So there's the massive time scales that I find helps put things into perspective when you're just thinking about what happened to you on a daily basis. It's like, yes, that happened on one small little day in this grand cosmos of time. But also the expanse of space. That's another way in which I found it helps me put things into perspective, because Hindus aren't so focused on the earth. Hindus, they do think out to the solar system, to the stars, to the wider universe, and even to multiple universes, multi-universes. So large time scales, large space helps put things into perspective. Then the Vedanta, and then more recently the Bhagavad-Gita, the wisdom there, to help you to understand how to see ego in situations and how to detach. Obviously, still loving people and being a participant in the world and in society and activities, but doing it in a detached way so that you can stand back and not let things impact on you so much. I found that really helpful on a daily basis, where at night, I'd be maybe worrying about what happened to me during work that day. I would just listen to a Vedanta lecture and those worries would just kind of disappear. And now, in many ways, I don't even get those initial worries. I find now I'm much faster when something happens to be able to already detach and maybe see the ego in the situation or whatever, so that it doesn't even impact me so much to begin with. And then finally, that another way in which Hinduism has strengthened my mental health is that it's helped me to realize that each of us is on our own journey. And that, yes, we may make mistakes along the way, but we are all saved. None of us is going to go to hell for all eternity and burn there because of a mistake we may have made. It may mean that we may build up some karma, and therefore we have to do some more life cycles to undo that karma and learn new lessons. But it's just so empowering to know that really what matters is your own self-development, your progression towards moksha. And with all this mental strength now, it gave me the courage to set up my business, to handle just day-to-day matters, including family matters. And I mention this particularly because actually on a day-to-day basis, this is the thing that probably impacts on me the most. It's the fact that my family in Bharat are becoming very, very westernized. and it's causing quite a lot of tension between my husband, myself, and them. So, and I'm seeing it more and more over the years, over the last 4.5, 5 years that obviously I've been going out to India now, that they really respect things like ballet, English elocution lessons, eating non-veg. These are things seen as, in a very simple way, these are good things in their eyes. And it's becoming more and more apparent the more that I know about Hinduism, just how basic their knowledge is. In fact, I would say I probably knew more about Hinduism within the first sort of 2 years of being married to my husband than they did, despite them, being some of them elderly people and have always lived in India and are Hindus. And there was one event that really was sort of a catalyst in my life, and it's why then I went to set up English Behen Ke Dil Se on social media, where I do lots of this promoting of Hinduism and explaining of Hinduism through talks such as this and on Twitter. It was that because I'm trying to learn Hindi. When we went to India, I wanted to practice speaking my Hindi with them in the house. And even though we only visit India maybe once a year, so we only see family at most once a year, they refused to talk to me. They'd rather not talk to me at all than talk to me in Hindi. They said it was English or they just were going to ignore me. And I just figured there is something seriously wrong here. So that really was a wake-up call for me. And then on that same visit, we went down to Tamil Nadu, and some other things then fed into my decision to realize I had to act and try and do something to help this situation. One of them was that in Tamil Nadu, as we're driving down the motorways, I could just see churches after church after church after church after church after church. I couldn't see any mandalas anywhere. So that really struck me as odd. Then on the flight back from Tamil Nadu back to Mumbai, on the plane, they were playing Jingle Bells, even though it was like the middle of January, so Christmas had finished like 3 weeks ago. It was actually on Makar Sankranti. And then when we arrived at the airports, it was still full of Christmas decorations. And that, when just the Diwali before, we'd spent it in Goa, and there had been no celebration, no decorations for Diwali at our hotel resort, on the plane, on the journey to Goa. So that was another reason why I thought there's just something not right here. So I decided to set up English Behen Ke Dil Se, and that was made all the more possible because of this mental strength that I found through becoming a Hindu. I've realized that it's good actually to speak out, to have maybe unpopular views if they are true, if they are truth, satya, and also they are seeking to protect dharma. Because quite often there's such a popular narrative built around an issue that may be totally adharmic, and until you are woken up to that fact, you're completely in this space where you just go along with the flow. And now I've realized, no, to question everything actually. And in many ways, Hinduism is so beautiful in that way that it empowers you always to be inquisitive, always to be questioning, because the purpose in Hinduism is to progress towards moksha. And in that, you obviously are making progress towards understanding the truth. So seeking the truth is integral in Hinduism. And it may sound bizarre to Hindus, but that's the complete opposite in the Abrahamic faiths, where it's a system of blind belief. And you are basically put in a position of fear to believe these blind beliefs, where there is no option to question. And there is so much evidence against them being the truth, but because you're in this blind belief view of the world, you somehow don't see it, or you don't allow it to impact or to absorb into you. So yes, on English Behen Ke Dil Se, now having this courage through strengthening my mental strength, but also having so many role models, Hindu role models to be inspired by, because Hindus are very brave. They come from a warrior a Kshatriya tradition, and that includes women. And there are so many examples of inspiring women, inspiring Hindu women. Whereas when you look at the Bible and the West history, there are no women mentioned, or if there are, it's only as the mother of Jesus, for example. In Hinduism, there are so many inspiring women, right from Ma Sita, how she stays so strong in that year where she is kidnapped by Ravan, or Draupadi Ji in the Mahabharata. She has such a clear understanding of what needs to be done to protect Dharma, and she helps the Pandavas to understand what needs to be done, and she sort of puts them into action. And then more recently, Jhansi Ki Rani, Ahilyabai Holkar, Rani Durgavati. There are so many examples of strong, courageous Hindu women for girls to look up to. And it's so different to in the West, where I was saying that women have been so oppressed in the West for centuries. And it's brought about this idea that women can only be meek and mild. And that's because when they are being oppressed, it allows a couple of things. Firstly, it allows the men, their sort of testosterone fueled men, to do as they wish with the world. And when you are in the Abrahamic mindset, what you want to do with the world is you want to convert it, or you want to kill it, basically. It's converting or conquering and killing. Because when women are suppressed, they aren't available to keep men in check, in balance, because women do, on a gross level, they have a higher level of sensitivity to the world, to nurturing. So it's actually a beautiful dance almost between a man and a woman in a marriage, because they're there to keep each other in check, to balance each other out. But when the woman is being so suppressed, men can then do as they wish and kill. And the other thing that the Abrahamic faiths did, when they were sort of positioning how a man and a woman should be in a marriage, is that they associated the woman as the temptress, as the original source of sin. You look at Adam and Eve. And what that does is actually a very clever mechanism, again, to suppress women by allowing them to feel shame for being who they are, because what it's saying is by your very nature, you are a temptress. And obviously that gives the idea in the Muslim faith that women then have to be completely covered with a burqa. And on the other side, it puts this idea into men's minds that, oh, my wife is a temptress, so I always need to be suspicious of her. And so what it's doing is it's creating discord in society between men and women. And that's actually one of the objectives of the Abrahamic faiths, really, is to create discord, because what that does is it positions people below the church, for example, so that the church is seen as the savior to whom you do your confession, or to whom you look for solutions, because your home life is a mess, essentially. So that is so opposite to in Hinduism, where women are so empowered. And it's why so many inspiring women have managed to come about in India. And it's because in Hinduism understands that gender isn't this binary system of masculine qualities for men and feminine qualities for women, where there's this big chasm in between. It understands that both men and women need to at times get fierce. At the same time, other times they need to be calm and peaceful. Whether you're a man or a woman, these are just healthy behaviors of human beings. And when you look at a Shakti, particularly during the Navratri period, it's just so well exemplified, this idea, because each day you see a different form of Shakti being worshipped, from the very calm, nurturing, motherly form of Ma Shela Putri, all the way through to Ma Kali in her very fierce form, where actually I understand that Ma Kali, in many ways, she is the most caring form of Shakti of them all. It may not seem like it when you first consider it, but then again, when you imagine that here is Ma Kali, who will do absolutely anything to restore Dharma, to protect the righteous beings, then that is the most caring form, right? She doesn't care what she looks like, what she has to do, whether she has to drink blood or whatever. She'll do whatever to protect righteousness, to protect the weak, to protect the people who need to be protected. So in many ways, she's the most caring form of Shakti. And all of this feeds into the idea of Hindus having a warrior tradition, including women, having courage and needing to protect Dharma. And now when I jump to contemporary world events, I can see how that really needs to be reinvigorated. Many Hindus have forgotten this. When we look at the saying of ahimsa paramo dharma, people often forget that's just half the story. The other half is so too violence to protect Dharma. That is the other ultimate. So it is in our responsibility as Hindus to be protecting Dharma, and too many Hindus have forgotten that. So what I feel my responsibility as English Behen Kadilse on social media on a day-to-day basis really is really to help Hindus to rediscover their warrior tradition, and particularly to see when Dharma is being under attack. And often, as I said earlier, there are popular narratives fed into society through the media, through politics, etc., where it's become the norm to think of a certain issue that is horrifically adharmic as normal and something you don't want to disrupt. Now, as someone who comes from the Abrahamic mindset, can see certain things very starkly, I feel. So that's why I feel it's my responsibility to be helping Hindus to see issues at Dharma where maybe they've been lulled into a false sense of security that there isn't a Dharma. So if we start on my day-to-day dealings with Hindus, particularly in the UK, there is this daily small-scale discrimination that goes on. A good example is on Amazon UK, where they're selling toilet seats and floor mats with Bhagwan Ganeshji on or Om on. Now, this is unacceptable. Yet, when on social media people post about this, often the backlash comes from Hindus themselves saying, oh, it's just a small thing, it doesn't matter, don't rock the boat. And that is just such a short-sighted way of looking at this issue, because the more of this little discrimination, it actually isn't little. If you imagine, would they ever put Jesus's face on a toilet mat? No. Would they ever put the Prophet Muhammad's face on a doormat? No. It only happens for Hindus because we allow it to happen. And each time we're allowing these things to happen, we're giving our enemies essentially a longer and longer rope with which to hang us eventually. And I do really fear that Hindus are facing an existential crisis. Now, this existential crisis comes around from two sources. The first is from external sources. And for some reason, I find that Hindus, modern day Hindus, are not very good at knowing that they have enemies or imagining that someone would want to hurt them. They often sugarcoat things, is how I find. And yet it's really important that Hindus do understand the mindset of particularly the Abrahamic faiths, but also of communists and Pakistan and China and all these enemies, external enemies. But particularly the Abrahamic faiths, I find Hindus have a very poor understanding that the Abrahamic faiths, they feel that Hindus are devil worshippers, that we will burn in hell for our beliefs, for our practices, for worshipping murtis, for believing that Bhagwan is in everything, etc., in karma, because of our belief in karma and all of this, we're going to hell. And that the only remedy for us is either to be converted or killed. And it's very scary, particularly when you look in India at the changing demographics of, that the increase in population of the Muslims and the Christians. It really does make you realize that, Hindus are facing an existential crisis here if it carries on at this pace. Now, the second source of enemy almost is almost like from within, and it's like an internal eating or rotting away of Hinduism by people who on paper maybe are Hindus, but really they're not, because what they are, they've latched onto this sort of neo-Hinduism or this universalistic Hinduism that was sort of imposed upon Hindus by the British Raj in order to control Hindus. And they did it very cleverly. They did it by writing very bad things in like academic studies about Hinduism that then got published around the world, including in India. So people then started to believe these bad things about themselves. And secondly, by watering down the Shastras and by Christianizing them, essentially. And even to the point where the Hindu leaders believe those were watered down, Christianized versions of the Shastras. And a sort of central point in this sort of neo-Hindu universalistic mindset is the idea that all religions are the same. And it's just total rubbish because what is the best in Hinduism is considered completely damnable in the Abrahamic faiths. The idea that we are all Brahman, that we should worship murtis and worship Bhagwan in everything, that we have multiple cycles of life and we build up karma. These are all damnable beliefs. The 10 Commandments literally target each one of those. So it's impossible for all religions to be the same. And what is so sad, as I said earlier, is the Hindu leaders, even today, are still sort of pushing this narrative out there of all religions being the same and trying to appease with the other religions. And it's just very silly because on the one hand, you're not going to be attracting Western seekers or people from the Abrahamic faiths in that way. They believe in Jesus or in Islam as it is, or if they are open to having their mind change, they don't want to hear about Jesus anymore. They want to know the truth. Certainly in my learning of my journey of Hinduism, at no point have I thought, oh, I wonder what the relevance to Jesus is here, or I wonder what the parallel to Jesus is here. Of course not. I've left Jesus and Christianity because they are not satisfying me. I'm not finding the truth in that. So I want something else. I want the alternative. And what's worse, though, is what the Hindu leaders are doing is that they are Christianizing Hindus rather than Hinduizing Christians. So it's really backfiring and it's very dangerous. And why all this is very important to me, and just to finish off here, is because now leading on back to the sanskars where we started. So I am actually currently now in my second trimester of pregnancy and looking forward to the next sanskar, which is Simantonayan. I haven't actually learned how to pronounce that one yet because I've not experienced it yet. I don't even know really what to expect, but I'm really looking forward for it. I understand it's a sanskar ceremony to promote health in Shishu, in the baby, and to encourage or ask for blessings for a safe delivery for me. It'll be a bit interesting to see what exactly we managed to arrange during COVID, but I'm sure it'll be wonderful, whatever we manage to do. Now, looking forward to the future for my child, we'd love to raise Shishu in India, but the question is, where can we raise him or her safely? When we look at where should we settle in India, there really is a big question mark. But one of the things I definitely know is that I want them to be raised as a strong Hindu. And that means also be going to a gurukul for education and maybe learning Kalari Payatu, whether Shishu is a girl or a boy. I think it's really important that they learn a martial art, not just because it will be helping them to become a resilient individual and it will help them in their life, but also because if there is ever a civil war in India, which, you know, looking at the changing demographics and the precursors of the Delhi riots, the Bengaluru riots, you know, it's a possibility. I want them to be, you know, have the best chances of survival. So Kalari Payatu is something that I'm very consciously, or some other martial art, I'd really love them to take part in. And so things I'm already doing right now while I'm pregnant to try and promote a strong Hindu in my Shishu is I listen to Garbharaksha Stotra every day. I am reading the Srimad Bhagavatam every day. I read it in English at the same time as listening to an audio version of it read out in Sanskrit so that Shishu can hear it. And I'm learning Hindi. I'd love Shishu's mother tongue to be Hindi. But importantly, I'm being very active in, you know, doing more work as English Behen Kadil say on social media and being activated in standing up for Hindus so that those impressions form in Shishu as well. Because I hope, you know, as the future generation, we need them to be strong Hindus. We need them to ensure the survival of Hinduism and within India, but also for it to spread globally, because there are so many benefits that the world would have if it were a Hindu world. People would be happier, people would be healthier, people would be more peaceful, the world would be more sustainably, environmentally sustainable, animal welfare would be improved, it really would be a better place. So I think it's really important for all of us who have children or grandchildren, we have a big responsibility to inspire the next generation. So we need to spend time with our children, really, you know, good quality time with children, inspiring them, teaching them, guiding them, and activating them as strong Hindus. So that was my speech. Thank you very much. My story from before Vedic Vivah Sanskar, my Vedic Vivah Sanskar, then my journey as a Hindu, and finally looking forward to the future with a Hindu child. If I have any questions, I'll happily answer them, please.
How did your parents, family, and friends react to your adopting dharmic way of life?
Yeah. Yes, very good question. Dhanyavad. So my parents actually were quite relaxed about it. I mean, there were a few sort of misunderstandings about India and Hinduism that I had to correct, but all I had to do really there was just explain things, because obviously everything they know about India and Hinduism is from the media, it's from films, etc. So naturally they have misconceptions.
Yeah,
So
Slumdog Millionaire.
Sorry, G?
Slumdog Millionaire. They must
Yeah,
have, yeah.
well, actually, the big one in my family was Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, in fact, that, you know, it was Indiana Jones. You know, we were raised on that film, those films essentially, and obviously Hindus are portrayed horrifically in that film. But also things like when it comes to disability, I know my mother had a misconception around how Hindus view disability, that it's, you know, it's their karma, they deserve it. So I had to explain about karma to her and how, yes, maybe it is their karma, but in many ways, you know, disabled people have the greatest opportunity to make progress towards moksha. If you have a very comfortable life, actually that in many ways is the hardest way to make progress towards moksha, because you never have any needs or wants, everything satisfied. And at the same time, it is our karmic duty, our karma as people who are not disabled, to be helping disabled people. If we don't do that, that's very bad for us. We are building bad karma. So, you know, I had to explain these sorts of things to them, but otherwise, actually, my parents didn't cause a problem. My father's grandmother, she's quite a strong Catholic. She's Polish and strong Catholic. She did object, and she said, "Oh, I never want anything more to do with you again." Now, the thing is, I say that, but to me, it actually wasn't too big a deal, because she had said a similar thing to so many different people in the family when they married somebody of a different Christian denomination. So, for example, my mum is from Scandinavia. She's Protestant. So when my Catholic dad wanted to marry my Protestant mother, my paternal grandmother was not happy. She never liked my mum. Or when one of my aunts married a Scottish man of a different denomination of Christianity, again, that split that family completely because it wasn't Catholic. So, I mean, that's just the nature of Christianity. It's very divisive. So that's how parents and family responded. Now, friends is an interesting one, because growing up, a few of my friends were quite strong Christians, but it was at university where they became very strong, because the sort of missionaries, they target students in the UK quite heavily. I mean, I remember being targeted in my undergraduate years, sitting in the library doing work, and then someone would sit next to you and strike up a conversation, and before you know it, they've got a copy of the Bible out, maybe in like a cartoon form, and they're trying to ask you questions, and you're looking around thinking, what is going on here? You know, at that time, I would just gently and politely ask them to go away. But if, for example, some of my school friends, like they were suffering some health issues, or they were suffering loneliness, or homesickness, if someone is striking up a conversation and drawing you in, it can be quite an easy way to make friends and to feel a purpose in life again and be part of a community. So some of my school friends became quite strongly Christianized at university. And then, so since then, with me becoming a Hindu, it can be quite awkward now. When I attended one of their weddings recently, the priest was basically praising the missionary work of their husband, the man that my friend was marrying, and that made me feel very awkward. I hadn't quite realized just how strongly Christian they were. And when you walked around the church, you could see all these missionary boards of churches built and all around the world, and it was just terrifying. So yeah, it's strained those relationships a bit again, I'd say.
Makes sense, yeah. Vijayji, please go ahead with your question.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think it's very little time and there are a few more hints. I'll be very brief. Thank you so much, Ms. Melissa. You were excellent, actually. I really appreciate that. My name is Vijay Rajvedya. I'm a co-publisher of a publication called India Currents. It's a 34 years old publication from California. And I also conduct Hindu weddings, which arose because of the similar requirements that you exactly described. And I've done the similar things exactly. But my question here is, there was a little difference here. Your wedding was conducted in India and in 19 minutes. My hat's off to you. That's an amazing thing to achieve. But then you also had the audience or the attendees who were very much conversant with what it was, what to expect. And my attendees over here, most of the time, are exactly what you described, not knowing anything about Hinduism. And I take 43 minutes in that process. So you are very good in explaining some of the things that I wouldn't expect 99% Hindus to explain about Hinduism. So my congratulations. And my question is, what can you tell me that I could do to improve on this, or some suggestions that you observe that I can incorporate in my process? You're not seeing what I do, but I do basically the same thing. 8 processes, 43 minutes, explain Sanskrit verses not translate, interpret them in English so that everybody understands it. But still, it takes that much time, yes. And I'm very selective, by the way. I don't do everybody's wedding. I interview them only if they fit into my requirement. I will accept the thing. I have to get my son married because he is marrying a Caucasian girl and he wants me to conduct the wedding. Sorry, took a long time. Please, your comments.
Sure. So I guess this kind of actually feeds into a slightly bigger thing, which is that in many ways, Hinduism is so diverse, so deep.
Very good point.
Often very complex. So when it comes, reading the Shastras, like I said, it took me I had to do like a few stepping stones to get to that position, to be able to receive the gyan from the Shastras. And it started with reading the Amachitra Katha comics, then watching the Mahabharata and the Ramayan TV series, before then being able to read the Shastras myself. When you compare it to the Abrahamic faiths, where things are actually, the ideas are quite simple, even children can understand them. So we have to be very careful in everything we do as Hindu parents, grandparents, anyone who's trying to inspire the future generation, to make sure that we are presenting things in an accessible way, because they are complex subjects.
Right.
So I have made one little video on my YouTube channel, English Pen Kadilse. I think it's about 6 minutes, in fact, where I've taken those 19 minutes. I made a 6-minute version with photos from my wedding. So maybe something similar to that, like a real beginner's guide to the core stages or events within the Hindu wedding, in a sort of audio-visual form. It really makes me realize that even the Natya Shastra, as I once did some research on the Natya Shastra and about traditional Indian dance forms, because as I understand it, as humanity was deteriorating and having less capacity for understanding the Vedas, Bhagwan Brahma realized he had to do something to make it more accessible. So he created provided the Natya Shastra to humanity as a sort of audio-visual aid to help people to understand the Vedas. But I guess in a similar way, we need to think, how do we go about this for our everyday events and sanskars? And there really is a lack of information out there. The Vedic Vivaha Sanskar, the reason why I know these things is because we had an individual there, or I guess my in-laws, they did a very good job in choosing who was going to be conducting the ceremony, with an individual translating things into English in a very beautiful way. But if you go on the internet, you won't find any of that beauty. Like, most of what's written is total rubbish, really. And it's the same for the other sanskars. When I'm looking up about the other 15 sanskars, the description you find about them is pretty poor. So we just need more materials out there that are accessible. So I think it's the responsibility of all of us as Hindus to be helping to create these materials. But at the same time, we obviously need to make sure they're authentic. So talking to the Panditjis, really well-versed Panditjis as to what the true significance is, so that it's a truthful representation of the meaning of every aspect. So I'm afraid I think I answered that question too well. I guess it's not an easy question.
No, thank you so much.
Easy answer.
But if you can share that video, I've sent my contact information on the chat.
Lovely.
That'll be so nice, because I'm also now preparing for, as I said, my son's wedding, and the family of my would-be daughter-in-law is coming from a very strong Catholic background. So there is a challenge there. Yes.
Yeah. Well, best of luck with it, G. Best of luck.
Thank you.
I will email you, Dhanyavad.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Padmaji, please go ahead.
Melissa, thank you so much for this very deep and enlightening talk. And we share passions, because I did not grow up in India, and I just did rituals, as my mom said, but my mom had no knowledge. She was not taught about any of the scriptures or philosophies, and I've had to learn it. And I've been in America 46 years. And over the years, when I've seen how Hinduism is treated, I've come to realize we have to defend it. But defending it is very difficult, first of all, because most of us don't know enough about I'm now in my 70th year trying to read Bhagavad-Gita. So that is where I'm starting. But I also have a Catholic daughter-in-law, a very nice person, but she's also staunchly Catholic. And, she doesn't stop us from doing anything Hindu. She joins us, and that's wonderful. But the challenges I see are so numerous. First of all, violence to defend Dharma, to me, is I can't deal with that. I can't deal with any violence, whether to deal with Dharma or Dharma. The word violence cannot inhibit my space. I'm not brought up like that. So I think most people of Hindu faith are like that. so caught up with ahimsa, so violence doesn't go with that. And the second thing is the immense poverty in India. I did some research for a social project, and I found out India has 2.4% of the world's surface area, but 16.8% of the world's population, and only 4% of the world's fresh water. So this is the fact we have to deal with. And then we have all the evangelization and the foreign money that's pouring in. And if I'm a poor person and somebody offered me money, I would take it no matter what, if my kids are starving. So we have to deal with that reality, and we have to educate a lot of people, but we have to really look at the issue of poverty, because during the British Raj, 45 trillion of dollars, current dollars, 45 trillion was swindled out of India. So we could even ask 1 trillion back and build enough toilets for everybody. And the Mughals stole a lot more. So if we got some of so that's why we are so poor. And poverty creates its own problems. And at the time of creation of Pakistan, India gave 75 crores of rupees to Pakistan for its genesis. I mean, so there are a lot of things done against India. So I really, really appreciate you. I really appreciate you, because you give a totally different perspective from what I can. First of all, you've studied everything. You come as a source, as a voice of reason that I can share with my grandkids, because they will understand you better than they will understand me, because I get too passionate. But they will understand you better. I can share you with my friends, because they get suspicious when I start preaching about this. But you are very calm, not overly passionate, and very, very neutral voice. And I would love to see your English Ben blogs. I would love to do that. So thank you so much.
Oh, Tanya Raji, and you're too kind with your words. But I must say, when you do go onto my YouTube channel, I actually made a video a few months ago. It was actually for one of my Bhatijas in the US. He knows nothing about Hinduism, and he asked me some really basic questions. So there's I think it's about 45-minute video made for children answering basic questions about India and Hinduism. So your grandchildren might enjoy watching that. Talking to your point about India being a very poor country and the problems that creates, totally agree with you. And that's why I am so happy with this social economic work that Modi ji is doing, because you're right, until someone's belly is fed, they are really at the whim of the missionaries to be converted. It's way too easy. So it's important that everyone has a full tummy. And Modi ji is doing excellent work, and creating all the toilets, etc. I wish Modi ji would do more for Hindus and Hinduism. But I realized that no matter what he tries to do, he's always facing such a difficult situation. There are so many anti-India forces, anti-Hindu forces acting against him. So even when he introduces something so innocuous and lovely as the farmers' bill, you see the opposition, the resistance, the violence, the terror that he faces, something so nice and innocuous, as I say. So he really has a hard time. But speaking to the point also about violence. Now, one of the ways that I feel I do my bit to protect Dharma is not going out busting up people or anything like that. It is speaking out on social media, trying to correct untruths and make people aware when they're talking nonsense, essentially. And it's not like I'm physically busting them up, but in a way that is I guess a form of violence. It's a way to protect Dharma. So there are many ways in which we can all be protecting Dharma. So it's important that we all find our ways, the ways that are best suited to our personalities, and we do what we can there. And obviously reading the Bhagavad-Gita, I find makes you really understand that there are times where actual physical violence even is required to protect Dharma. So I really hope there is not an instance in the future where there is a civil war in India, but as and when, if there is, then we need to know what we need to do to, or Hindus in India, what they need to do to save Hinduism. Because I understand it's very scary to think that the Muslims in the big cities, particularly New Delhi and Mumbai, they're apparently buying up lots of machine guns. My husband's very interested in sort of national security, and that's what he tells me. So there is potentially a very scary future for India. So Hindus need to to rediscover their warrior tradition and to know what needs to be done to protect Hinduism and Dharma.
Thank you. Thank you so very much.
Krishnaji
God
tried
bless.
the diplomatic way before he finally went to war. So he tried everything. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Rajendra ji, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, Melissa ji. I'm calling from Toronto, Canada, and I will ask just two-liner question. But before that, I want to appreciate your farsightedness, which Hindus need to adopt. I love the point you made that you're going to prepare your child for self-defense. I think that is very, very important. So now my question is very basic. How did you inspire yourself, or who inspired you? What inspired you to get into Dharma?
Very good question. Dhanyavad. So it would be unfair of me not to give my husband some credit, certainly. Because obviously starting out with Hinduism, I needed some direction of some sort. So he was the one who suggested the Untitled comics and watching the TV series. And so certainly he has been guiding my journey, but it's been a very effortless journey where I then have been wanting to go out and seek more and know more. And so it's not been like at all the idea that he has converted me and forced me, nothing like that at all. It has been my journey, my own, my proactive journey. And when it comes to who inspired me to speak out and be very passionate about protecting Hinduism and Dharma, I must say it is the individuals from the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, and then the people, the Hindus of ancient and slightly more modern India, who were so strong in knowing what is right and what is wrong and how to fight for it. I'm trying to remember the name right now of a young girl. She was, I think she was 19 years old in the 12th or 13th century. Can't think of the name right now, unfortunately. But she was so brave that she created an army of 20,000 women soldiers to fight against the Mughals. And they were so effective that they repelled the Mughals. And they then never came back for a long, long time. So frustrating, I can't remember her name right now, but it's mentioned in one of my earlier videos.
Dita from Kashmir?
There's so many of these women that I find so inspiring.
Is it Dita from Kashmir?
No. Oh. Yeah. So, but yes, that's another one. There are so many, exactly. I remember finding that one so inspiring because I think she was, 18 or 19 years old, and she built up and trained 20,000 women soldiers to fight the Mughals. And yet nobody in India has heard of her.
Yeah, that's right. We never heard of her. Yeah. Dipankar ji, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Kapoor, for your very inspirational speech. You have seen both sides of the world, okay? So what do you think is the limitations of Hinduism? Why so many people try to fight against Hinduism? That's basically, I mean, there must, or you find that everything is all good?
Dhanyavad, very good question. So I think it's something that I probably touched upon earlier. I think maybe one of the weaknesses is that Hindus aren't very good at seeing enemies and understanding enemies. They have a tendency to sugarcoat things. And I think it's particularly bad in modern day times, but I think there has been like a trace of this. If you look back maybe at the history of Kashmir, I remember reading an article that the Hindus, they kept facing all of this discrimination by different Muslim leaders, and yet they would still be inviting more Muslims to come and settle in Kashmir. We're talking here in like the 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th centuries, or allowing Muslims to become Raja kings and have leadership positions and become politicians. So they didn't seem to learn the danger of, be able to learn what was inside a Muslim mind, and they still haven't. And in many ways, it might be because they became so sort of entranced by Muslims, and that they became fearful to speak out. They almost felt it was like a slightly perverse sort of survival mechanism, that you allow the Muslims to do as they wish, and maybe you even promote them and things because you're fearful for what they will do to you, not realizing the more you allow that, again, the longer and longer rope you're giving them to make things worse and worse and worse for you down the generations. So that is something that I sometimes struggle to understand why that hasn't corrected itself. When you look at the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, when there was a Dharma, it was corrected so quickly with divine intervention, obviously. But at the moment, it seems like people haven't drawn enough inspiration, maybe, from the scriptures, from the Shastras, to learn how to do this without divine intervention. And with it being Kali Yuga, there is so much of Dharma about, but we still haven't learned how to tackle it. I don't know if that's a very good answer to your question, G. But yes, I'd say that's one of the sort of frustrations maybe I have with Hinduism.
We'll have a last question from Anuradha ji.
Namaste, Melissa ji.
Namaste. Namaste.
I just have a curiosity question. Did you say you studied physics?
Hanji, yeah. My undergrad was physics, yes.
Okay, because I'm finding this a very strange thread that everybody who's studying Hinduism has a background in physics.
Yeah, I know. It's funny you mentioned that, because I was just thinking that a few of the people I'm in contact with, we all are physicists. And in fact, we're organizing a panel session, one looking at ancient Hindu science, another looking at why Hindus are better positioned to lead in science and technology into the future. And I very passionately feel that Hindus really are best placed to drive scientific and technological discoveries in the future, because we have that open-mindedness. We have a different way of looking at the universe. We have a different perception of consciousness. And until you have that ability to think slightly differently, it'll be very difficult for people from the West to make leaps and bounds into understanding, are there multiverses? What is that universal consciousness? That's sort of those big, big questions. And that's exactly where Hindus, I think they're going to be making light years ahead in progress. But carry on, Ji, was there anything more to your question?
Amit ji has a question.
I would be interested.
Oh, she has one more question. Okay.
Work, because I also have a background in physics. So
Yes.
Anuradha ji also has a blog, Melissa ji. She has a travel blog on the Hindu temples in India.
Oh, beautiful. I must check that out.
Yeah,
Anuradha,
it's called Indie Tales. Yeah.
Okay. Lovely.
I'll follow you.
And I guess actually, being a Hindu has made the transition into Hinduism all the more effortless for me, because there is so much scientific validation of what is in the Shastras. For example, the distance from the earth to the sun, the fact that how the solar system operates, And that's why there have been so many fantastic scientists throughout India's history, where making discoveries that then were forgotten from the world during the Islamic invasions and the burning down of all the libraries, only to be rediscovered in the West. So for me, that whole scientific angle has really made Hinduism, I guess it accelerated my journey into Hinduism because it was being validated before my very eyes.
I sometimes feel we need to reignite that scientific consciousness more than anything else.
It's a very good point, G. Very good point. I mean, there are, as I said, there are a few scientists who are showing a lot of promise, from a Hindu background. So I don't know if you're aware of Professor Subhash Kakji.
Yes, yes,
you recently
yes.
got a paper published into Nature about the optimal number of dimensions of space. We all think of space having 3 dimensions. He's got a paper published in Nature, which is a really big deal, finding that actually the optimal solution would be if there are 2.72 E, essentially, that many dimensions to the universe from an information theory perspective. And it's really, as I said, I'm trying to organize a session with Apajit Chavdaji, who is a contemporary physicist, but also a strong Sanatani. We're talking about this and other ways in which Hindus really could be making these grand discoveries in future. And there's such implications on if there are 2.7 dimensions, what does that mean for consciousness? And it really could open up so many big questions. It's just fascinating, I find.
Right. Thank you.
We can sneak in one last question from Amit ji. Then I think we'll be out of time. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Melissa ji, for a very inspirational talk. I have a very technical question. When you converted to Hinduism, did you actually undergo a religious ceremony to adopt or come into the fold, or was it like, okay, now you're practicing Hindu in the sense that you read the books, you take part in the rituals, and you think like that, and hence you call yourself Hindu? And this is just a technical question.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I think I've been asked this once before, but only once, which is actually quite surprising when you think about it. But yeah, no, I didn't have any formal ritual or anything like that. It was a very sort of organic journey for me, where I guess where I came to the point where I realized that, yes, the truth is in things like karma, life cycles, that progression towards moksha. When I genuinely felt, yes, that is the truth of life, that was when I felt confident to say, okay, now I'm Hindu. And it's so wonderful within Hinduism that there is such a diversity of ways of living and doing things. Yes, there are the sanskars and these different rituals that you can do, but because there's such a variety of them, you can sort of almost like pick and choose the ones that work for you. And in that way, there may be some formal rituals that you can take if you wish. If you don't want to, you don't have to. The same as everything really within Hinduism. There is a lot of freedom of expression and diversity. And that's just so different, again, from the Abrahamic faiths, where you have to do certain things in order to be a good Christian. As a Hindu, there's diversity. Even when you consider the path to moksha, there are different paths to yoga. There's Raja Yoga, Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, and it depends on your personality, what works well for you. So you can make best progress potentially through Bhakti Yoga if you find the others a bit more difficult. So I personally find Raja Yoga is probably the one I do least. Doing the yoga asanas, pranayama, meditation. I don't do too much of that, but I feel I do a lot of karma yoga with English Behen Kadilse on social media. I do a lot of bhakti yoga. I go in the mandir every day. I do Hanuman Chalisa to Hanumanji every day. So that works for me. So yes, that's the beauty of Hinduism. There's so much freedom to do things that suit you and that benefit you and that will are best suited to you progressing towards moksha. So they don't have to do a certain ritual.
Right, right. The reason this question was asked, and I also want to share it with you or with the audience as well. Like there are some people for whom ritualistic transformation may be important. Like, say, for example, as you said, that in the Abrahamic faiths, you have rituals or you have to do certain things to be called, like a Muslim or a Christian or a Jew. So in Hinduism, I mean, like not in like the mainstream Hinduism, but if somebody is asked, like, if I'm asked this question, and one of the things I can say is that if you like a non-Abrahamic, non-Hindu wants to convert to Christianity, then actually there's somebody like, say, the Arya Samaj, for example, they have rituals which you can undergo to, become a Hinduism. Because I know this from, say, the example of Mahatma Gandhi's son, who, became his elder son. He became a Muslim at one point of time and then reconverted back to Hinduism, and the Arya Samaj helped him. So the point to note is like, if there is somebody who wants a ritualistic way to come back to Hinduism or convert to Hinduism from another faith, then there are some methods, because some people may want that, and it's always probably good to know that if you're asked, okay, maybe just share it. Just a point to make.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's true. I have seen some photos circulating on social media of Gardavapsi, people being reconverted into Hinduism, and there I have seen pictures of like formal rituals. But as far as I understand, you don't have to, because that's the beauty of Hinduism.
Okay, thank you.